Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiara Yakini, and I work in the Community Engagement Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I will be your moderator for the evening. For full accessibility today, it is critical that speakers first identify themselves by name before proceeding to speak and mute their microphones after they are done speaking. We have ASL interpreters on screen, and live card captioning is available by turning on subtitles using the CC icon on the lower part of the screen. We will have a question and answer portion during today's session, and attendees can use the Q&A function on the lower part of the screen to type in questions for our panelists at any time. With that said, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the second monthly installment of our MI, spelled M-I, Response to Hate campaign. If you happen to have missed the launch of the campaign last month, it is available for view at your convenience on the Michigan Department of Civil Rights YouTube and Facebook platforms. We will have a new installment every month through September, at which time the campaign will culminate with our annual My Response to Hate conference. In honor of Black History Month, today's forum will focus on race-based hate and bias, what it looks like, and what we can do to prevent it. We have a dynamic panel of presenters lined up for you today who will explore what the data shows, the motivation behind hate crimes targeting Black Americans, the details of an actual case that occurred here in Michigan, and what businesses and organizations can do to prevent race-based hate and bias in the community. To underscore the importance of this topic, I'm going to quickly review the Michigan Department of Civil Rights data. Please give us 1 second to get it on the screen. Thank you. As you may or may not be aware, MDCR's core mission is investigating complaints of discrimination in employment, education, housing, public accommodation, public service, and law enforcement. Allegations of discrimination that have occurred within 180 days prior can be made to the department in these areas based on religion, race, color, national origin, arrest record, genetic information, sex, age, height, weight, marital status, and/or disability. These are what we call bases, or in other words, the basis on which a complaint is filed. In reviewing the data over the last 10 years, we have found that race has consistently been the basis most commonly named for complaint issues from years 2012 through 2019, falling second to disability in years 2020 and 2021. Looking at the graph, you'll see that not only has race been the #1 basis named, but it has been #1 by a wide margin in comparison to other bases, with the exception of disability. The Department of Civil Rights conducts general civil rights presentations that take a deeper look at this data. But for the purpose of this forum, we simply want to highlight that race is still very significant as it pertains to discussions on the topic of bias incidents and hate crimes. Thank you for sharing the slide. Our first presenter will discuss the federal data and provide a historical context for race-based hate and bias in the United States. He will also talk about what motivates hate crime offenders. Please welcome Dr. Frank S. Pizzella, Associate Professor with the Department of Criminal Justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the Program of Doctoral Studies in Criminal Justice at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Dr. Pizzella received his master's and doctorate degrees in criminal justice and criminology from the State University of New York at Albany. In cooperation with Springer Publishing, he has published 2 monographs. The first, entitled Hate Crime Statutes, A Public Policy and Law Enforcement Dilemma, published in 2017, explores the policy dilemmas and unintended consequences of hate crime statutes. The second, The Measurement of Hate Crimes in America, published in 2021, describes patterns, trends, and measurement issues associated with accurately depicting the prevalence and severity of hate crimes in the United States. Dr. Pozzella has co-authored numerous journal articles and research reports on the topic of hate crimes. Additionally, he has provided testimony before the United States Civil Rights Commission about the burgeoning prevalence of hate crimes and was a member of the National Association to Enhance the Response to Hate Crimes with the Lawyer Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Dr. Pozzella regularly teaches undergraduate and graduate courses about the history and correlates of hate crime offending and victimizations. In addition, related and ongoing research on race and crime issues reflect the extent of his contemporary research agenda. Dr. Pozzella, the floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much, Tiara. I really appreciate this opportunity, to talk with you all today. I want to give some thanks to the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, the Department of Civil Rights as the operational arm, reflecting the leadership of John E. Johnson, the executive director, and Kimberly C. Woodridge, not to mention Anthony Lewis, the director of community engagement. And you, of course, Tiara, for reaching out to me tirelessly to get me to come to do this. Also want to give thanks to my research assistant, Ms. Danielle Bromley, for allowing me or facilitating, putting this deck of PowerPoint slides together. So without further ado, why don't we talk about race-based hate and bias, what it looks like, what we can do to prevent it. I'll talk a little bit about patterns, trends. I'll talk a little bit about, some of the statutes. I'll talk about the motivation of hate crime offenders. And amazingly, Tiara, as I was looking at your slides, it's amazing. Your slides represent the complaints that come to the Department of Civil Rights, but it's amazingly accurate and parallels what we see in national trends, as well as the Uniform Crime Report trends for Michigan. So if we will put up the first slide. All right, next slide, please. So in this snowfall slide, what I thought it might be helpful was to look at the national picture. And much like Michigan and the statistics that the Michigan Department of Civil Rights is collecting, we see that race, ethnicity, and nationality is the most prevalent hate crime, or what we call bias motivation, from 1990 to 2018. This is significant because we've only been collecting hate crime data since 1990. When you think about it, what they don't talk about here, is they don't break out race, ethnicity, and nationality, but we know what's primarily driving the slide, if you look in the red, is the issue of race. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the offender characteristics and bias motivations. In the first column, you see offender characteristics. The second column, sex orientation, gender, and gender identity. The third column, race, ethnicity, and nationality. And in the fourth column, religion. So what are some of the major offender characteristics and bias motivations? What we see is, look at low education attainment, poor work performance, mental illness, substance abuse, and criminal histories. What it doesn't say is the race of the offender. And if you look at the national data from 1990 through 2018, as well as some of the Michigan data, we know that the race of the offender is primarily young white males. Next slide. So in this slide, this is I analyzed a little bit of 7 years of Michigan Uniform Crime Report hate crime data. And in the snowfall slide, what you see is the total number of hate crimes as reported to the FBI by year from 2014 through 2020. In the blue, what you see is those total numbers. And you see that the numbers peak around 2017, and then they start declining, around 2018, 19, and 20. But amazingly, when you look at the percentage of anti-Black hate crimes, what we see is they seem to be increasing at the same time the ones in the total hate crimes are decreasing. So what we see is if we see anti-Black hate crimes in the amount of 35%, all the way up to 45% by 2020. So we ask ourselves, well, and this is, let me just say, this is completely consistent, with the trend lines that Tiara put up, at the beginning of this forum. So again, 35, 42, 41, 42, 31, 39. May not seem a lot, but when you think that the FBI collects 14 different anti-bias types, of which anti-Black is only one of them, 35% is a lot. On the right side of this slide, what we see is total hate crime offenders by white hate crime offenders. So of the total hate crime offenders in 2014, 80% were white. Of the total hate crime offenders in 2020, 65% were white. So this is completely consistent with the patterns that we see, that what we see here in Michigan is completely consistent with the patterns that we see nationally. Primarily, it's white hate crime offenders that are mostly committing most hate crimes, but particularly anti-Black hate crimes. Next slide. So, I think it's important that we understand and define hate crimes. So we call them hate crimes, but that's kind of a misnomer. Hate is an emotion, much like love, but you don't need hate to commit a hate crime. It's not the offender's hatred per se, but the offender's prejudice or bias toward the victim. A crime that's committed as an act of prejudice. As a working definition, a hate crime is an illegal act involving the intentional selection of a victim based on a perpetrator's bias or prejudice against the actual perceived status of the victim. And it's important to note that hate crime is a uniquely severe harm and form of aggression that serves both an instrumental and a symbolic function. And I'll talk about that right after the next slide. Next slide, please. So I decided to just take a look at some of the statutes, that we have. So the first one, some of the AUSA attorneys that you had last week were talking about the Matthew Shepard and James Bryan Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act. This is the federal statute. And basically what it provides for is whoever or whether or not acting under color of law willfully causes bodily injury to any person or through the use of fire, firearm, dangerous weapon, or an explosive or incendiary device, attempts to cause bodily injury to any person because of actual perceived race, color, religion, national origin of any person, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So it's two things going on there. First of all, it says, there's an evidentiary criteria. It has to be willful. And the second thing is only certain groups are protected, those groups that are just named. Contrast that with the New York statute. New York 48505, my state. A person commits hate crime when he or she commits a specified offense and either intentionally selects or commits the act against the person against whom the offense is committed or intended to be committed in whole or in substantial part because of a belief or perception regarding the race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, gender identity, or expression, religion practice, age, disability, sexual orientation of a person, regardless of whether the belief perception is right. New York covers a lot of different groups. Now contrast that with the Michigan statute. This is pursuant to Michigan Law 750.147B, the ethnic intimidation statute. A person is guilty of ethnic intimidation if that person maliciously and with specific intent to intimidate or harass another person because of that person's race, color, religion, gender, and national origin. There's any of the following, and then it mentions a number of different injuries. So these are three different statutes. Two are state statutes, one is a federal statute. What do they have in common? They all elevate the sanction for hate-motivated violence. Michigan is unique in that it provides for a separate charge of ethnic intimidation, whereas in New York and the federal statutes enhances the penalty. You know, for instance, if in the federal statute, if it's been found that, let's say an aggravated assault was a result of bias or hate, according to the sentencing guidelines, they will elevate that level of sanction, that level of sentence 3 times to enhance the penalty. Whereas in the Michigan statute, it's a separate crime altogether. Next slide. So it's important to know what is the hate offender's purpose? Well, he has two purposes, or she, symbolic or instrumental functions. The symbolic function is to send a message to the victim and their group that they are a despised social group. But the practical or the instrumental function is to force the victim and their group to alter their behavior, to make sure that they safeguard their behavior, force the victim to internalize the potential for a violent victimization. Think about what happens when you see a hanging noose, or you see a burning cross, or a swastika on a synagogue. What message is trying to be sent? So they want to get the victim to understand that they're under the constant threat of future victimization. Next slide, please. So this slide is entitled Typology of Hate Crime Offenders. So for the last 20 years, we have categorized offenders into one of four types. Thrill-seeking offenders, and this is most of hate crimes that you see around the nation, are basically kids, thrill-seeking, don't necessarily understand the full import of their act, but yet it's some prejudicial crime that can be prosecuted as a hate crime. So almost 66% of offenders are thrill seekers. The next is defensive offenders. Well, these offenders, this is about 20%. This is a situation where somebody, an LGBTQ person, a African-American person moves into a formerly dominant neighborhood, and there's a reaction to that. There's a feeling that territory is being encroached. And then there's retaliatory offenders. Now, these are offenders who retaliate because somebody in their group has been attacked, for a hate crime or maybe even not a hate crime. And then finally, there's these mission offenders. Now, mission offenders represent only about 2% of all hate crime offenders, but these are the most serious. These are the ones that are actually committing this act with the bias motivation in mind. You think about the men that were just convicted of the Ahmaud Arbery hate crime case. Those were mission offenders. Or the Dylan Roof case, where that young man went into that church and shot up that church, specifically because, he hated Black people. So those are the ones that we're concerned about them all, but those are the ones with the most animus that really, really, really kind of want to strike out, against all types of victims. Next slide. So what is the message? Well, the message from hate crime offender are numerous. One, they're sending a message of group superiority in entitlement primarily delivered by symbols: burning cross, hanging noose, swastika, or words. They want to assert that the victim's group is not wanted, they're not valued, that you don't have equal rights. They want to make you feel bad, that they want to let you know that the offender's group is powerful and to be feared. If you assert oneself, it will result in harm. And there's this, one of the things we talk about in the hate crime scholarship is interchangeability. So are they just talking to the primary victim? to the person upon which they're actually hurting? No, they're talking to the victim's group. And the idea is that when you put a burning cross in a Black person's lawn, you're sending a message to the primary victim, but every Black person that sees that burning cross understands and is reminded of victims of the past terror, the hate atrocities, that have happened in the past. It conjures up the history of lynching, 400 years of slavery, and all that has happened. So that's the point. And it's primarily tied into the symbols, and that's essentially the message from hate offenders. Next slide, please. So, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the psychological factors associated with hate crime. So in the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about 5 different theories. Now, it's important to note that no one theory explains all hate crime offending, because remember, we have 14 to 15 different types of hate crime motivations, or what Tiara called bases, from anti-Semitic, to anti-Black, to anti-white, to anti-Muslim, to anti-LGBT, and different motivations can be contributed to different types of offenders. But basically, the minority group threat theory suggests that as a minority group grows in population, and as they grow in power, and they grow economically, and they grow politically, the dominant group becomes much more threatened and will then perpetrate both formal and informal kinds of sanctions against that group. Formal, you see that in the form of disparate numbers of minority groups in the criminal justice system, but informal in the form of prejudice, and hate crimes. So minority group threat theory seems to explain a lot of the offending, particularly as it relates to people moving in neighborhoods. When you look at the progress the LGBT community, has had over the last couple of years in terms of their activism. The strain theory. Now, this is a theory that straight out of the criminological theories, that says that in the United States, we all have aspirations for success, but we have differential means and differential opportunities. Isn't it ironic that hate crimes spike during times of economic downturns? This is when offenders look at those who are succeeding, look at those who are actually making progress, and they look at the absence of progress on themselves, and they look at that as feeling this kind of strain that makes them commit these kinds of crimes. So while it's used to explain all kinds of crimes, it's particularly used to explain hate crimes because it tends to happen. Hate crimes spike during times of economic downturns. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about some of the social psychological theories of hate crime offending. So social identity theory is a theory that suggests that hate crime offenders derive their self-worth from group membership. So if you remember one group, that is the way in which you derive your value. That they promote their in-group by denigrating some out-group, in a form of prejudice or in the form of hate crime aggression. Hate crime acts tends to boost their self-esteem and tends to legitimize their aggression. So this is social identity theory. And it's very similar to social dominance theory. And social dominance theory suggests that, the motivation to retain a positive image of themselves that is intertwined with images of their group, where that offenders have a greater desire for social dominance that leads to prejudice and belief in their own group, that their group is superior to other groups. And then finally, there's right-wing authoritarianism. And this is a theory, that suggests that people with histories of conformities to traditional and conventional values, these hostility to those who challenge those values. So it explains, hate crimes against Muslims, hate crimes against Blacks, hate crimes against LGBT community, those who don't embrace a conventional mainstream lifestyle are often subject to this kind of offending. Next slide. So what can we do these are recommendations to deter hate crimes. Now, these recommendations I wrote in my book, The Measurement of Hate Crimes, but also was derived from my participation on the National Association to Enhance the Response to Hate Crimes with the International Association of Chiefs of Police and Lawyers for Civil Rights Under Law. And the first thing is police departments need to have a written hate crime policy displayed publicly. People need to know that police care. And one of the things that we suggest they do is have a policy right up as soon as you walk into the department, they see it. Also on bulletin boards, throughout highways. Police should also improve and enhance the police community engagement. That's so important. You have to reach out to communities. Isn't it ironic, that the groups with the most strained relationships with the police are the groups that are victims of the most prevalent hate crimes? So there's a disconnect there. Track non-criminal bias incidents. We know that what precedes a hate crime is non-criminal bias incidents. If we know that non-criminal bias incidents are occurring in the community, then we also know the hate crimes will follow. Provide hate crime training for police and community organizations. In many instances, victims don't even know they've been a victim of a hate crime. They almost think it's normalized. In many instances, police don't even know, how to bring a charge for a hate crime. They don't know necessarily, what the particular statute is, such as the one I enumerated, in Michigan. FBI provides that kind of training, understanding that of the 18,500 police departments in the United States, half of them have 10 officers or less. These 10 officers are not, these communities can't afford to send their officers away to go to FBI training. So we need to find a way to address those, even if it's through kiosks, through Zoom meetings or anything like that. Improve hate crime data collection and mandate official reporting. I think that's important because hate crimes are one of the most underreported crimes you can imagine. I'll give you a sense of that, before I wrap up. FBI reports about 8,000 hate crimes a year. When you look at the National Crime Victimization Survey, so the FBI is reporting hate crimes that have been caught. The National Crime Victimization Survey are surveying victims. So every year, an average about 250,000 victimizations suggest that they've been a victim of a hate crime, as opposed to the 8,000 hate crimes that are reported by the FBI. So there's a disconnect there. We need to improve hate crime data, perhaps mandate official reporting. Engage state and local politicians. Now, honestly, no community wants to highlight hate crimes in an area. If you want to figure out a way to really make your property values go down, or to really perhaps get unelected, start talking about this type of offending. But still, we need to engage state and local politicians. And then finally, we think it works best when police are working in conjunction with the role of the prosecutor. Prosecutors tend to plead down hate crimes because they're so difficult, to prosecute. But when you put together like places like the Oak Creek Community Task Force, where you have prosecutors, politicians, and police working together, then it works best. And community and police and politicians are on one accord. So that's my presentation for today. Next slide. And I thank you for hearing me out. Can't hear you, Tiara.
Apparently I was on mute, my apologies. I was just thanking you for that insightful look into what motivates hate crime offenders. And I was saying that there are many questions that can be asked of you following that presentation. And I'm sure our participants will have many questions for you at the end of the program. So we look forward to you answering questions at that time. Right now, we are going to take a deep dive into a hate crime that unfortunately occurred right here in the state of Michigan. This case study analysis will be led by Supervisory Special Agent Patrick M. Guillahan, who is the current supervisor of the FBI office in Ann Arbor, Michigan. During his 17 years with the agency, SSA Guillahan has served in multiple field offices and at FBI headquarters in both criminal and national security roles, as well as serving as an FBI instructor, undercover operative, and forensics technician. He is a 2019 winner of the FBI Medal of Excellence, and it is with great honor that I introduce him to you today. Please welcome SSA Guillahan.
All right, good evening, everyone. And Tiara, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Appreciate the time this evening. I'm going to spend some time tonight talking to you about a case that we investigated out of Monroe County, United States versus Lee Mowat. I'm going to first talk to you about the case, how it came about, the details of it. Then we're going to talk about why we chose this case for federal prosecution. Some of the issues that we discussed as we talked about taking it federally, and then of course at the end we will talk about how the case finally ended up. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you all a PowerPoint here, which hopefully will show up. Not so much. Hang on one second. Okay. All right, so we will take a look at this PowerPoint here. So let's talk about the case and how everything started. So we're going to take you back to June 6th of 2020. We're at Sterling State Park in Monroe, Michigan. Those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Monroe, Monroe is the southeasternmost county in the state of Michigan, borders one of the Great Lakes over there. So here on June 6th, we have two young gentlemen, both 18-year-old Black residents of Monroe, Devin Freeland and Thomas Grant. Mr. Freeland and Mr. Grant both visit Sterling State Park on June 6th to do what any of us would do on a hot summer day. They want to use the beach, they want to hang out with their friends, they want to have a good time. So Freeland, Grant, and some of their friends hang out on the beach and listen to music. Pretty standard day for them. Same time, same day, Lee James Mowat Jr., a 42-year-old resident of Newport, also went to Sterling State Park with his two daughters, his grandson, and a couple of friends. They also are apparently seeking a fairly normal beach day, and Mowat and his friends also spend time on the beach without incident. Okay. And one of the things that I want to highlight here is that all of the witnesses that we spoke to and everyone that we talked to all told us flat out that there was no interaction between Lee Mowat and Devin Freeland or Thomas Grant before the incident that we talk about next. Okay, so they had never met before, they had never spoken before, no interaction at all. So around 7 p.m., Devin Freeland and Thomas Grant go back to the parking lot and play some music near their car. Okay, they have one of those portable Bluetooth speakers that I personally love because I can take them anywhere. At around the same time, Mowat and his family go to the same parking lot to return home. Okay, everybody's kind of clearing out of the state park at the end of the evening. Everybody's headed out. Multiple witnesses, okay, all the witnesses that we spoke to, including Lee Mowat's daughter, report that Mowat becomes aggravated upon hearing Devin Freeland and Thomas Grant's music. Okay. Again, no interaction between them before this, no discussions, no talks, whatever. Lee Mowat simply walks up, hears two young Black men playing music, and becomes aggravated. Okay. Mowat then starts yelling at the two boys and their friends from a distance. Okay. He starts calling it ghetto music, makes the statement that Black lives don't matter. Okay. Yells at them that he will smash a cooler over their head if they say anything back to him. repeated use of the N-word, calls them monsters, tells them to stop killing their own kind, tells them that their type doesn't belong on this beach and that it is his beach. Okay. So let's settle just a little bit of an umbrella here, right? What are we looking at? We're looking at a white man who becomes so aggravated by the mere presence of two young black men, that he begins yelling racial slurs, unbidden, unprompted. Okay. Needless to say, this doesn't go terribly well. Mowat walks up to the teenagers, to Devin, Freeland, and Thomas Grant and their friends, and confronts them and threatens them directly. Continues to use the N-word liberally throughout this discussion. Okay. As Mowat threatens to assault the boys, one of them says, "You better not do that because we'll kick your ass." Okay. Mowat then responds, "I've got something for you in my car." All right. Mowat then walks away from the teenagers back to his vehicle. The teenagers all believe the confrontation is over. Okay. They turn back to each other. They start partying. They start talking. Mowat, it turns out, walks back to his vehicle and retrieves a bike lock. Okay. Something he happened to have on hand. He approaches the group again, approaches specifically Devin Freeland. Now, Mr. Freeland is not particularly the one that he was encountering before, was not the one that he was having words with before necessarily. Devin Freeland hears Lee Mowat say, "Hey." He turns to see Mowat coming towards him in what we could best describe as a very aggressive stance. Devin Freeland brings up his hands in self-defense. Okay. Never once takes a swing at Lee Mowat, never once aggresses towards him, brings his hand up in self-defense. And Lee Mowat takes this bike lock and strikes him across the face. At which point Devin Freeland collapses, bleeding heavily. All right. Mowat continues to aggress, swings the lock again at Thomas Grant. Now, Mr. Grant is lucky enough that Mr. Mowat missed him with this swing. Mowat continues to try to attack members of the group, but is stopped by his family and other people around. Okay. So I want to show you here, I'm going to show you two witness videos, and then I want to play the audio of the 911 call from Mowat's family. Okay. So I'm going to start by playing this first video. Now, in this video, you're going to see Devin Freeland, who is wearing a kind of a yellow shirt, and you're going to see Lee Mowat, who's dressed in like a black sleeveless shirt and red pants. And I will let you know first off that this video is taken from a distance and is a little bit grainy, but I think it's important to kind of see how the situation plays out. So let's go ahead and play that one. Okay, so here you can see that's the moment where Devin Freeland gets struck. He backs away. You can also see Mowat's daughter engage the situation there to try to stop Mowat from doing any more. Okay. All right, now I want to play this 911 call for you here. Okay, it's about a minute long. It is the first call made to Monroe County 911 from someone on scene.
Monroe County 911 operator 11. Hello.
Hello?
You're breaking up. Where are you at?
I'm at Southern State Beach, and I think I'm Monroe, Michigan. My dad jumped his house, and he started talking about how Black Lives Don't Matter, and how people are trying to fight him, but he came and swung this string and this bike down on him, and he already busted a kid in his mouth.
Do you know which one? Are you at the beach or are you in a campground?
I'm in the parking lot, like I'm right across from the playground area. He hit him with a bike belt, a metal bike belt, he hit him across the face with my dad. He's drunk and he's racist. And Black Lives Don't Matter.
What's your name?
All right, so a couple important things that I want to highlight in that phone call, right? So again, first of all, this is Lee Mowat's daughter. So his actions today are so reprehensible that even his family is sort of disowning him as this goes on, right? She says straight up, my dad is drunk and he's racist, okay? Very obvious what the motivation is here, very obvious what is pushing us forward. She also says, you know, he struck this kid in the face with a bike lock, okay? Again, very obvious from the beginning what has gone on here. I want to show you here one more, excuse me, sorry. I'm going to show you one other video, okay? This is a video taken from a slightly different angle that shows a different view of the fight. Let's go, let me go ahead and roll this. All right. We don't get to pick our cinematographers here. But again, what you can see here is you can see Lee Mowat in the black shirt, and he is advancing aggressively on another young black man. It's also worth noting as we watch this video that every single young black man that we have seen here, Devin Freeland, Thomas Grant, this young man here, all of them are backing away from Lee Mowat. All right. At no point do any of them approach him, and no point do any of them even attempt to engage in self-defense, which I think here would be very, very justified. I muted the audio on that video because it is difficult to listen to. But were I to give you the audio and were you to listen closely, because it's kind of rough audio, you would hear that Lee Mowat continues using racial slurs and threatening the boys even as they're backing away. Okay, this is not a situation where we can even entertain a claim of self-defense on the part of Lee Mowat. Okay. Next up, I'm going to show you guys some photos of the scene and some photos of the bike implement, the bike lock itself. Okay, so here's the weapon where Mowat dropped it on the ground. And here's one of the officers who responded holding it. Now, it may be difficult for you to tell if you're not a bike person. I am not, so I had to look this up. But you'll notice here that there's sort of a black chain, okay, that kind of comes around the top. And then there's a black cylinder at the bottom. That black cylinder is the locking cylinder, right? It is solid steel. It is fairly heavy. I've actually held this piece of evidence. It's fairly heavy, okay? There's no chance that swinging this at someone isn't going to cause them very significant injuries, okay? This is a heavy piece of equipment. It's also worth reminding you at this point that Lee Mowat went back to his vehicle to retrieve this specific implement, okay? So this is not a situation where Lee Mowat happened to be caught off guard or something. He takes himself away from a situation, walks back to his vehicle to get this specifically. I believe because he knew it would cause significant harm. Now, next up, I want to show you a couple of photos of the injuries to Devin Freeland. And before I show those, I'm just going to give you a brief warning. They are bloody, okay? I think it's important to show them, but if you're not a fan of blood, you don't want to see those, just turn your head for a moment or two. I'll let you know when they're off. Okay, here they come. So this is Devin Freeland's injury, okay? It is very obviously significant. I didn't go to doctor school. I can tell you this is a very significant injury. It is a little bit difficult to tell, but he has a very significant cut on the side of his face. He also lost several teeth, including teeth that are adult teeth, important for mouth development. He also broke some bones here, okay? Keep in mind, this is at a time when Devin Freeland is getting ready to graduate high school. He's about to graduate and get his graduation photos taken and all this. And this injury dealt him a very, very severe blow. Okay. All right, and for those of you who are a little bit squeamish, the photos are gone, so you can look back now, okay? So let's talk about what happens afterwards, okay? So the fight is kind of going on, right? I hesitate to even call it a fight. The assault is going on. This is a very one-sided event. Mowat is stopped by a combination of his family, Monroe County Sheriff's deputies, local park rangers, state park rangers, okay? Mowat tells his daughters the following. He tells his daughters that he did this in self-defense, okay? He believes he's defending himself against some perceived action. He says, they threatened me with a gun. He says, I had to do it or they were going to hurt my daughters. And he says, they called me a white motherfucker. Okay. So at no point did anyone besides Lee Mowat see this gun. Okay. We can tell you for sure Devin Freeland didn't have a gun. None of the other young men there had a gun. Nobody sees this gun. None of the witnesses, none of the other people there, nobody. Okay. I had to do it or they would hurt my daughters. Now that's a quote from the police report from our witness interviews. I had to do it or they would hurt my daughters. Fantastically interesting statement to me when I read that, because at no point did any of these young men approach or talk to Lee Mowat or his daughters. And in fact, none of the witnesses talked about anybody speaking about the daughters at all. Even after Mowat confronts the boys and they get in this verbal confrontation, at no point do the boys talk about his daughters one bit. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit of my own thought process on here, but ever since I read this report, I have thought that these two statements are sort of very clear definitions for racist thought. Okay. Why does Lee Mowat think that these kids have a gun? Because Lee Mowat thinks that all Black kids have guns, right? It's a very typical racist trope. Why did Lee Mowat think these young Black men were going to harm his daughters? Because he thinks that that's what Black men do. He thinks that Black men are looking to rape white girls all the time, okay? He is following these racist tropes almost to a T, okay? And then he ends with, they called me a white motherfucker, okay? Now, I don't know that we ever figured out whether that statement was true or not, whether they said that or didn't say that. But let's put that in contrast. Let's presume for a minute, give Lee Mowat the benefit of the doubt. It's the only time in my life I will ever say that. Let's say that the kid said that. Where do we put that on the balance against screaming one of the worst racial slurs in history over and over and over and over, right? On the one hand, you've got Lee Mowat screaming this racial slur. On the other hand, at best, you've got these young Black men using this term. It's not even comparable. Right. This is a situation where Lee Mowat is trying to convince himself that he's the victim. Right. He's potentially hearing, and I want to make it clear that we don't know that anyone ever said this. He's potentially hearing an oblique reference to his own race. And he's using that as a justification to use vicious, vile racial slurs against another party. And again, I will just remind you that Lee Mowat started this confrontation. So he didn't start using racial slurs as a response. He definitely started doing it of his own accord. So Monroe County is on scene very quickly. Local park rangers are on scene very, very quickly. Devin Freeland gets medical attention very quickly, gets transported to a local hospital. Monroe County puts Lee Mowat in custody immediately. Monroe County prosecutor charges him with 1 count of assault with intent to do great bodily harm and 1 count of ethnic intimidation, okay? And this is where the case rests as of, June 7th of 2020. So let's talk now about why my office chose to accept this case, why we took it forward, and how we sort of came to that discussion, okay? And I'm going to give a lot of the credit for this here to my agent, Sean Nickel, who is on the line and listening to this right now, while I take credit for all of his good work, because that's what supervisors do, right? So Sean and I had a lot of discussions about this case, and I've made a point since I took over the Ann Arbor office to try to increase our understanding, our prosecution of civil rights-based crimes and hate crimes. And we saw this one as a potential opportunity. Now, as Dr. Pizzella talked earlier, and as you heard last month, we talked a lot about the Shepard-Byrd Act, right? 18 U.S.C. 249A1, okay? So 249A1 criminalizes causing bodily injury to any person through the use of a dangerous weapon because of that person's actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin. Okay. So we have to prove a couple things here. We have to prove bodily injury. Okay. Well, we all saw the photos. That one's pretty easy. Okay. Through use of a dangerous weapon. Okay. Now, the dangerous weapon doesn't have to be something that is only a weapon. Okay. Obviously, a knife or a gun or a bat would be a dangerous weapon. But anything used as a weapon and anything that we can reasonably say would cause great bodily harm can be classed as a dangerous weapon for purposes of this statute. Okay. So generally, when we look at these federal prosecutions, we run into this issue. All right. So great bodily harm is pretty easy to prove, usually. Dangerous weapon, pretty easy to prove, usually. And then we come to the third piece, right? Because of the actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin. Okay. It's that because of that sometimes causes this issue, right? So let me give you a couple examples here of when we struggle with because of. Okay. Let's say that a white man like myself goes to a bar, gets into a beef with a black man, and we engage in a fist fight. Okay. Let's say that I win that fist fight, I as the white man. Have I caused bodily injury to this black man? Sure. Have I done it with a dangerous weapon? Sure. Can we prove that the assault occurred because of my animosity towards the other person's race? Sometimes that gets difficult, right? The hate crime prosecution doesn't cover situations where two combatants are of different races, okay? It requires us to prove because of, right? So here, do we have evidence that Lee Mowat assaulted Devin Freeland because of Freeland's actual or perceived race? Absolutely. And one of the reasons I like talking about this case is because it's pretty much blatant, right? We have recordings, we have witness statements. We know that Lee Mowat started this fight, started this confrontation because he didn't like being around black people. That's it, right? It's super obvious. One of the reasons I sometimes don't love talking about this case is I sometimes like to talk about the more subtle versions of this one, where it's not so terribly obvious. Having said that, it's a wonderful case to talk about. So we have all three pieces here. We can prove bodily injury to Devin Freeland. We can prove that he used a dangerous weapon. And we can certainly prove that his motivation was because of the actual or perceived race of Devin Freeland. I do want to mention something very, very quickly here, just as a brief aside. Note the use of the term actual or perceived. Actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin. Here, we had Lee Mowat using racial slurs against a young black man. Had he used those racial slurs against someone that he simply perceived to be black, it would still be a problem. If, for instance, Devin Freeland turned out to be Hispanic and Mr. Mowat was using anti-black racial slurs, no worries there. It's actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin. Okay. So as Sean and I talk about this case, we decide that we have the three elements. We think we're in good shape there. And then there's a secondary couple of questions, right? So one of the questions we always ask ourselves when we take on a case at the federal level that the state prosecutors are already looking at, one of the questions we ask ourselves is, are we going to help in any way? Okay. State prosecutors are fantastic. We have a great relationship with the Monroe County Prosecutor's Office. For us to take it on, we have to believe that we are having a benefit in some kind of way, because otherwise we'll let Monroe County handle it and everything's good. Monroe County had agreed to prosecute this case. They were willing to run it all the way to ground, so we had no problems there. Sometimes we'll step in when a case doesn't get prosecuted at the state level. Here we don't have that. We asked ourselves a couple of things. Number one, what amount of time would Lee Mowat likely serve if we let the state prosecution go forward? Okay. State prosecutor, very likely, based upon Mowat's criminal history and what he was able to charge, would have likely only gotten time served and probation. Okay. So Mowat was arrested that day, June 6th of 2020. He did not leave. He has not left jail since. I will give you that spoiler for the rest of the talk. But he probably would have done, given Monroe County's lead time on cases like this, given that it is standard to offer plea deals in all cases, and given that Mowat had already sort of told us through his defense attorney that he was planning to plead guilty, Mowat likely would have been out in just a couple months as soon as he pled guilty, with a few months served and then probation. We can always argue whether or not we think somebody gets enough time. Do I think that 6 months or maybe a year in jail and a little bit of probation is enough for a guy like this? I don't personally, okay? From a sentencing standpoint, we knew that we could get quite a bit more federally, right? Sean and I also had a long talk about optics, okay? And when we talk about optics here, we really talk about whether or not we're doing right by the public by charging someone with what they've actually done, okay? Realistically, Mowat was likely going to get plead guilty to an assault charge at the state level, probably would have gotten ethnic intimidation dropped. Maybe not. Maybe he would have done both of them. But the primary charge here was going to be assault. Our question that we debated was, do we think that assault is really descriptive of what Lee Mowat did? Do we want to see him just put assault on his record and walk away, okay? In my mind, assault is what you get when you get in a bar fight, okay? When you scrap with somebody on the baseball diamond, okay? When you get in an argument with somebody at a hockey game, okay? Assault is something that's easy to explain away, okay? Imagine a situation where Lee Mowat comes out of jail, goes to get a job a year later, tells his boss, yeah, I got an assault hit, got in a fight with somebody, okay? Doesn't sound particularly bad. There's a major difference between assault charges at the state level and civil rights charges at the federal level. We carry a much bigger stick, okay? For me, and I think Sean would agree with me on this, we felt that a federal civil rights charge was a lot more aggressive, was a lot more descriptive of what Lee Mowat actually did, and would really communicate to the world later when he had to explain this. It would communicate to the world what Lee Mowat really did and how bad it actually was. No longer could he claim to somebody, this is just a bar fight, this is just me scrapping with some guy in a parking lot. He's going to have to answer for federal civil rights charges. Okay? So we proceeded to charge Mowat with 2 counts of violating the Shepard Act, 18 U.S.C. 249. We were able to get 1 charge for the assault on Devin Freeland. And we were able to get 1 charge for the attempted assault on Thomas Grant, okay? So remember, Mowat swung that lock 2 times. The first time he connects with Thomas Grant. The second time he barely misses, first time he connects with Devin Freeland. Second time he barely misses Thomas Grant. The law allows for us to charge someone who makes an attempted assault. So we were able to get 2 charges on this one, okay? Eventually, we agreed to a plea deal with Lee Mowat, okay? He accepted a plea agreement to count 1 of the indictments, all right, which charged the assault on Devin Freeland. We agreed to drop the charge on assaulting Thomas Grant, attempted assault on Thomas Grant. Given Mowat's previous criminal history, his sentencing guideline was 51 to 63 months, which is a little over 4 years to about 5 years. For those of you maybe not familiar with the federal system, when we sentence a defendant, the prosecutors calculate a guideline range, and the guideline range is what is considered fair for that charge. The judge in question found the assault to be extremely egregious and sentenced Mowat to 60 months in federal prison. So at the high side of that guideline range, with 3 years supervised release after that. So it's important to note here, especially in the Eastern District of Michigan, getting what we call a high guideline sentence is important, right? 60 months doesn't sound like a whole lot, but getting a sentence that's at the upper end of that guideline range is very, very difficult in the Eastern District of Michigan. And here we took some solace in the fact that the judge saw how bad Mowat had been and gave us that high guideline range. Also worth noting, the federal system, we do not really do parole in the same way that other systems do. A 5-year sentence at the federal level means you're doing a bare minimum of 4 years, okay? Probably quite a bit more, because you get that 20% range only if you're on your absolute best behavior for the whole time that you're in. It's pretty rare. Very likely Lee Mauat is going to do every bit of that 5 years. And then he's got 3 years supervised release after that. All right, so that is the end of my talk here. Got done a little bit early, so hopefully get that time back. I know we're doing question and answer at the end of this, so I will be sticking around, happily answer any questions that you've got for me, if any, at the end of the evening. That's all for me, so Tiara, I will pass the baton back to you.
Thank you, SSA Guillohan, for that informative presentation. You know, it really highlights the importance of classifying these types of crimes as hate crimes. Again, as you noted, I want to remind our viewing audience that presenters will be available for questions at the end of the program, and so we can take any questions that you have pertaining to this presentation at that time. In going through the case study that was just presented, we saw an example of how law enforcement agencies address hate crimes that occur in the community. You might also already be very aware of nonprofit and community organizations in your area whose primary mission is to combat race-based hate and bias. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights partners regularly with many of these organizations to promote racial equity and social justice, and we honor them for their continued work. However, today, we would like to shift our focus to unconventional ways that you can take a stand against hate and bias in your communities. With that said, we are now going to hear from 2 local businesses and organizations who have been using their power and influence to make positive change within the community. First up, we have Daisuke Hughes, owner of Astro Coffee since 2011 and Ochre Bakery since 2019. Mr. Hughes has been using his position as owner of a local restaurant to advocate for social justice for many years now. Today, he is going to talk to us about that experience. Please welcome Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes, are you with us? Okay, it appears that he may be experiencing some technical difficulties. We will go on to our second presenter. Our next presenter is the president of the Granville Education Association, which is a teachers union right here in Michigan, who took a stand and developed a resolution in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within their local school district. In addition to being president of the Granville Education Association, Blake Mazurek has also served as a Granville history teacher and is a member of the Michigan Education Association Board of Directors. Please welcome President Blake Mazurek.
Hello, good evening. My name is Blake Mazurek. Please,
This is Tiara Yakini speaking. I'm sorry, Mr. Mazurek. It seems that you're having some connectivity issues. We're having difficulty hearing you. All right, well, we will proceed with Daisuke Hughes while we wait for Mr. Mazurek to establish his connection. Mr. Hughes, you can proceed if you're ready.
Thank you. This is Daisuke. Tiara, can you hear me this time?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened that last time. But, extremely honored to be here tonight and humbled by the presenters we've heard so far tonight. It's it's a big issue, and I feel like I'm just very grateful to be here tonight and share somebody, I guess, coming from the food and beverage industry can kind of offer in terms of what we see happening out here and what we might be able to do to contribute. So I wanted to kind of start off by acknowledging what we've heard already from Dr. Pizzella. Much of what he said, unfortunately, comes as no surprise. And I think that this issue, while it's obviously happening as we speak and up until this day, I think that the reality is it's been happening for a long time. And so some of the hate and what has played in this country, you know, we have decades of history. Just for instance, an example, mining in terms of real estate, environmental racism in communities of color all across the country and also the world for that matter. We've got a lot of issues where we see this issue manifesting in either a more passive sense, in a systemic sense, and certainly in a historical context. Where's that history? And I wanted to kind of point out how I see, you know, members of the community. One of our, how we relate to this issue, at least as far as I see it. One of the I think they estimate 48% of Detroit households are food insecure. What we might be referring to about that, there's a few different ways to look at it, but we could be looking at the issues. So accessibility to fresh and healthy food, not just boxed and canned food, accessibility in the sense of people's dietary requirements. There might be people that need to be vegan or any number of dietary issues and health concerns where they need a very specific kind of food. Something that they are able to get in is proximate to them. So unfortunately, you know, I think I have upwards of 40% also reliant on food stamps or other government assistance when it comes to the affordability of food. So I think the issue of food insecurity in the city of Detroit is major, and it's indicative of systemic issues regarding race, to be frank, over in the least 5 to 7 decades. Like I said, I'm humbled by the other speakers tonight, and especially that case we all just heard. I feel shook even still thinking about it. And unfortunately, I think that kind of aggression and that kind of mindset from somebody plays out at policy levels, plays out at city levels, plays out at systemic levels. We see it with voting rights and things like this. Where people are kind of systemically denied access to these things. So as we fast forward to 2022, I get to sit here. I'm about 11 years into having food-based businesses in the city of Detroit. We started with Astro Coffee over on Michigan Avenue. And more recently, right before COVID, 2019, we opened Oak Bakery over on Grand River in Warren. And, you know, these issues were near and dear to our heart when we came here, and deep in our philosophy of just kind of what it is that we are doing and why we are here. And I would like to point out that this is a complicated issue that I don't claim to have all the answers or solutions to. I would just simply like to offer, you know, see it and what little contributions we feel we can make toward everybody. At the end of the day, there's so much we all need to do to combat this issue. So But regarding food security and food systems, I guess I could start with coffee, and this is not a local issue, but it plays out at the international level as well, because when you start dealing with coffee, tea, chocolate, any of these commodities, you will find them or in regions of the world that yet again are typically communities of color. And the tradition and history has been, in my mind, towards those regions of the world as well. So, we wanted to make our commitments locally and internationally. We wanted to look at how we were buying coffee. And by the way, we began roasting coffee in 2017. So we are buying beans, we are buying them from the growing world, and we are, working desperately to connect in the highest compensation we can have, and to be cutting out the middlemen typically involved in this process. So that is one of the angles that we look at. And then as it relates to more locally, we try to work as locally as possible with food growers in the city or in East Michigan. The Detroit Community Food Network, Town Farms. We work with Oakland Avenue Farms over in North End, Brother Nature Produce in North Corktown, and even Shy Farms. That's a community member of mine. That's a friend of mine also who's coming from the Asian community, myself, Japanese American. So I'm also looking at the wider field here in terms of inclusivity. And unfortunately, we saw the spike in Asian hate crimes over the last few years because of Corona. So, I just wanted to mention that as a
It appears that Mr. Hughes' video is frozen. Mr. Hughes?
Work as closely. This is Daisuke Tiara. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Your connection seems to be going in and out a little bit.
All right. Should I continue, or did we miss a lot there?
Just the last probably few sentences you said I did not hear.
Okay. Well, we were really deeply into our supply chain and trying to
This is Tiara speaking. Daisuke, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but it seems that your connection has cut out again. Mr. Hughes? Okay, so we may have to suggest that Mr. Hughes signs out and joins again. I apologize for that difficulty. We will move on to Mr. Mazurek at this time, and we'll revisit Mr. Hughes. Mr. Mazurek?
Hello, my name is Blake Mazurek, and everybody, can you hear me? Is my connection better this time?
Yes, it is.
Great. I don't know how much of my introduction I was able to present to you last time around, but I am very, very honored to be here tonight. Listening to the presenters before me, I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm in great admiration for the work that our presenters have already shared with us. And I'm eager to share a little bit of what our story is. So my name, again, is Blake Mazurek. I'm an 8th grade U.S. history teacher in Granville Public Schools. And Granville is a suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan on the west side. And I've been teaching now for 28 years. I'm also the president of our local MEA association, the Granville Education Association. And I also serve on the board of directors of the Michigan Education Association. So when Tara reached out to me, she had found our local association's DEI resolution statement online. And we had a great conversation on the phone, and she asked if I might share a little bit about how we came to that. So some background: when we went into COVID teaching, where I had to do teaching online via Zoom, and for the entire year last year, my camera was set up where that behind me, it wasn't blurred out, and there was a Black Lives Matter poster that I had hanging in my classroom. And during this period of time, there was an increase in the rhetoric we're hearing across the nation at local school boards, speaking out against diversity, equity, and inclusion, against what critical race theory, things of that nature. And apparently there was somebody who saw the poster in my room and basically reported me to my administrators. And then it became an issue in our district where there was a lot of back and forth about what are things that we can post in our classroom, et cetera. And we could spend a whole day on where the civil rights of teachers ends and where it begins. But essentially, I was told that I needed to take it down, even though I was encouraged by our district leaders that they support the concept. So my situation was one of a few others that occurred throughout the district where other teachers were cited for similar things. And that prompted a lot of discussion among our members and between us and administration in trying to find where are the places where we can show support for our students and also be within the purview of the law. So as the MEA local association, we're the teachers union, we as a local are the voices of our members. So as a collective, we decided to do something and make a statement. So I put it out to our members who might be interested in joining the effort. And I had a great group of folks that volunteered to meet after school for almost a month, over the course of a month, where we hammered out a resolution statement. And I'm going to ask the person who's sharing the document to please put that up if you would. What I'll do in order to help our folks who may need to have some help with the hearing is, since we can't see it, so I'm going to read this. But what we did was we created this document and we presented it to our school board. And I'll share the response that we got after I read it through. So the Granville Education Association Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Resolutions. The Granville Education Association believes that every person, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, LGBTQI+, national origin, or physical, intellectual, or emotional ability, has the right to equal opportunity for education and employment and equal rights of citizenship as established in the nation and state by the Constitution, statutes, and judicial decisions. Whereas, in response to both the current and historically disparate treatment of and biases against the aforementioned persons and a growing awareness of these injustices in our Granville community and state and our nation, whereas schools should be a place for the practice of equity, for the building of understanding, and for the active engagement in creating pathways for freedom and justice for all people. Whereas the Granville Education Association acknowledges the need to address institutionalized racism and inequity in the communities in which we all coexist. Whereas we affirm the commitment to the emotional and physical safety of all Granville students, it means that our schools and classrooms must be safe places for dialogue and support on the relevant issues we are all facing. If the person could please scroll and I could read the remainder. Therefore, be it resolved that the GEA will, number one, encourage and support Granville Public Schools initiatives reflected in the work of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We are committed to finding ways where the GEA can partner with the district's goals. Number two, we'll call upon the district to allot and require professional development opportunities related to race and other challenging topics such as confronting biases, racial microaggressions, using school-wide data on race and discipline, fears, cultural ignorance, inclusion, and stereotypes of the aforementioned youth to all district staff and associated employees. Number three, we'll actively work to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in our local association by reviewing our bylaws and policies that may be contributing to the lack of diverse representation within our association. And number four, we'll establish a permanent Granville Education Association Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Five, and finally, number five, we'll promote the understanding, acceptance, and recognition of all individuals, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, LGBTQI+, national origin, or physical, intellectual, or emotional ability. So this was devised by our members. We put it to the membership. We asked for their input on each one of these statements. We received feedback. We did make some alterations with some suggestions from our membership. And by the way, we have a membership of over 300 professional educators. And then we took the final version and brought it forth to our members to vote on for essentially a ratification or approval of, which overwhelmingly passed. And just as an understanding of what the purpose of this and what we're hoping to achieve. Granville is a predominantly white district. We have about 75% white and 25% minority population. Our staff would follow in that same classification. So these efforts through our resolutions and also through dialogue with our administration and our school board, we believe as an association, these goals should be front and center in so much of what we do. And one of the ways we described it is we want to use it as a bit of a soft hand, where our school district fortunately has already developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. We want to work alongside that and continue to push it forward. It's easy for, I think, in general, school districts to be overwhelmed with so many other initiatives and things that are happening, where sometimes various, should we say, initiatives maybe get pushed aside or simply fall to the wayside. So we want to keep it front and center. This is a part of our soft pressure in order to do that. When I read it to the school board, it was well received by school board members and our administration. And unfortunately, what resulted was there is, you probably have seen in some news reports, or you may have experienced in local school boards in your area, there was some pushback from some folks who are attending these meetings and simply, unfortunately, they're very misinformed about what diversity, equity, inclusion is, social emotional learning, for that matter, what CRT is. So it did get some pushback from some of those folks, but overall, we feel like it's a positive step forward for our association and our district. And we have been working to honor those resolutions. We have formed a small committee in it, which is basically getting its feet. We're getting on our feet with it. And we put out monthly newsletters, for example. We also offer, we promote various trainings in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion to all of our membership. So we feel like as a district, as an association, we wanted to take a lead on something. We felt we needed to do something to address these issues, where, as I mentioned, Granville's demographics right now are, skewed heavy white population. It is changing. And we are actively, as a district, I know they're also actively seeking to hire more Black educators and other folks that would represent our students in a better way. So these are all efforts that are going forward, but there's a lot of work to be done. And coupled with the challenges we face from some of these groups that are attending board meetings, there's a long road to go. But I feel if we don't take an active step in doing something, then nothing gets done. So I'm eager to take any questions that people may have at the end of the presentation, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazurek. We really appreciate your presentation, and I want to thank you for your commitment for working towards achieving racial equity in your local school district. Your presentation is actually a great example of what schools and members of the education community can do to get involved to address this issue. So thank you again. Right now, I want to give the opportunity to Mr. Daisuke Hughes of Astro Coffee and Oker Bakery to complete his presentation. Mr. Hughes, are you available to speak at this moment?
I am available, Tiara. It's telling me I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. Is that?
Okay, we'll see if we can get that addressed, but if you could just go ahead and speak to us about the work that you have been doing in the community as a restaurant owner to address some of the issues that we have been discussing today. Oh, and you are back on video.
All right, this is Daisuke. Thank you so much, Tiara. Apologies for the connection errors. Yeah, one of the things Tiara and I had spoken about originally was throughout the summer of 2020, we had been working with other local restaurants and food groups on some fundraisers. We were supporting various causes throughout the city, Detroit Heals Detroit, Detroit Black Farmers Land Fund, Inside Out Literary Arts, Freedom House Detroit, Detroit People's Food Co-op, and work closely with Baobab Fair, which is an East African restaurant on Grand Boulevard and Woodward. And we kind of formed a collective with Baobab and the Detroit People's Food Co-op, where we were having fundraisers in the park in Core City over on Warren and Grand River. And each weekend we would be supporting a different cause collectively and donating a percentage of our funds or our sales from that day to these groups. And, Tiara and I had spoken about, what kind of things community members, restaurants, people in the food industry, how could we look at supporting, the city and community that we live within. And I think this is one of the ideas that we had, connected on originally. And, we were so excited to be doing that. It was a great summer. Unfortunately, COVID has done a lot of things to disrupt operations for us, and it's been very difficult for the last 24 months. So we haven't been able to keep up pace, but we have kept all our connections and continue to do that kind of work and collaborative work with other people that, see things the same way and want to use their platform and their voice to be motivators of social change. So, I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that, and I see that, connectively with working with a lot of Black farmers in Detroit, amongst other farmers, and farming's hard. And at the end of the day, without commitments from restaurants and cafes for the upcoming growing year, it's very costly to farm. And if you have a bad season, a bad crop, or bad weather, not a whole lot of money is going to come your way. And to make these kind of things sustainable, you need commitments from people that are going to be willing to support that system and pay for that system. So working with the local growers network in the city has always been very important to us over the last decade. We continue to strive for that. I don't know if I was cut off before, but working with the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network or D-Town Farms, Oakland Avenue Farms, Brother Nature Produce, just as a few examples. I don't know if I've cut out again. Apologies if I have.
You're still with us, Daisuke.
Okay, great. So yeah, just that commitment to both kind of sourcing within the community, looking towards our relationships within the community to support one another, trying to make our dollars stay circular within the community, but then also supporting other causes, even including, you know, Gleaners Food Bank, or what happens to food waste at the end of a day. If at the bakery, for instance, we have leftover food, we have St. Leo's, like directly across the street from us, where we donate food to on the regular, and just really looking at our footprint and our shadow in our community and what things we can do to mitigate the negative impacts of that while supporting everybody. Having said that, you know, we do have places as a result, you know, all organic, all natural, unfortunately does mean expensive. And I would very much hesitate to say overpriced. Expensive is a different thing. And part of that is that we wanted to make a commitment that the jobs that we do create in this city are jobs that you can have a living wage at. So, you know, our minimum wage has been at $15 an hour ever since Corona. And we also have a tip system in there. So typically speaking, that averages at more like $20 an hour for our lowest paid employees, which is really a dream come true. And it seems maybe even our fast food restaurants haven't yet gotten to that point. So we wanted to make sure that we're looking at the jobs that we're providing, that we're looking at that kind of the wage realities. And then of course, hiring within the community, the diversity of the workforce itself, all the way up through management positions. What does that look like inside an organization? You know, we're really proud of we kind of have department heads. We have a, you know, head of pastry, head of bread, head coffee roaster. And, you know, I don't really have to get into the optics, but the diversity amongst that is really not only impressive, but something I'm very proud of personally, because it's kind of more important to us that we are reflecting that. Just that honest work in a diverse collective and community feels like the kind of work we want to be doing. We're not really as concerned with, you know, competing in national reputation type things, but rather just doing the work, more the humble work at home, head down, and inclusive. So, you know, that's kind of the nutshell of what we're doing. We're really just trying to examine every facet of the business and how we can be really partners and stewards of not only the earth, but the city that we call our community, and the people we share the city with. Of course, another thing we're working on is like getting bridge card acceptance, all these other things to help with accessibility to these kind of establishments, because that's always, that's another consideration that is often not found in a lot of the newer Detroit establishments. And so I think, but at the end of the day, you know, the city is changing and people know that and they notice that. But, you know, I think Detroiters just want to know that with those who are coming in, you know, do they care about the place that they are calling home and setting up shop, or are they here because of some other purpose, some other reason that might not be as sensitive to that reality? And I think, you know, unfortunately, the jury may be out on that one, but there are ways that restaurants and cafes and food businesses can show to their community that they understand where they are, and that it's not an accident where they are, and that it's a privilege and honor to be here, and how can we work on special projects that show that. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope I did not cut out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daisuke. I really appreciate the work that you and others are doing. It is very impactful and appreciated. So today we have been talking about race-based hate and bias and ways to prevent it. And what I like about your presentation is that you presented tangible ways to address the disparate impact on marginalized individuals. You're looking at how your products are sourced. You're being very conscious on your practices and engaging with the community. And so we're happy to highlight your business today.
Thank you so much.
All right, so it is my sincere hope that with these last two presentations by Mr. Hughes and Mr. Mazurek, that you have been provided with some out-of-the-box ways for working to prevent race-based hate and bias within your own spheres of influence, because we all have a role to play in ending hate and bias here in Michigan. Whether you are a restaurant, movie theater, employer, business, school, religious organization, or individual, you have the agency to take action in your own way. In the months ahead of this campaign, My Response to Hate, you will have the opportunity to evaluate and effectuate your response to hate through opportunities to publicly pledge your commitment to a hate-free Michigan, or by entering a poster contest on why hate doesn't belong in our state if you are a student in grades K through 12. More details will be released regarding this in future campaign forums. So please stay tuned for ways that you can get involved and demonstrate your commitment. So with that said, we've had a lot of thought-provoking presentations today, and I want to make sure that participants have the opportunity to pose any questions they may have to our various panelists. So at this time, I will ask all panelists to turn on your cameras, and we will begin taking questions. Okay, so my first question is for Dr. Pizzella. Dr. Pizzella, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you recommended enhancing police and community engagement as a way to deter hate crimes here in Michigan. Here in Michigan, we have a coalition called ALPACT, which stands for Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust, whose mission is to bridge the gap between police and community. Can you explain further why improving police and community trust is an effective way to deter hate crimes?
Well, yes. First of all, I applaud Michigan for even having that kind of, fostering that kind of environment. Understanding that the people who are most likely victims of hate crimes are the people with the most strained relationships with police. So one of the things we recommend is for law enforcement communities working together to foster this environment, of trust. We understand that hate incidents precede hate crimes. When you have law enforcement communities working together, understanding that these hate incidents, which are not crimes, exist, then the police can get prepared. We have this problem of underreporting, and this problem of underreporting is directly related to what we call the perceived police legitimacy. So if you don't feel as though you're going to be heard, if you don't feel as though that you're going to get processed, in a certain kind of fair way, you're not going to go to the police. So there's like 5 things I think that law enforcement can do. And while I mentioned this in my book, it's also mentioned in that committee that I was on with the National Association Enhanced Response to Hate Crimes. 1, law enforcement in communities should identify community leaders that can serve as liaisons to the community. 2, participate in community forums to provide informal opportunities to engage community leaders. Create these kind of formal committees to establish standard operating procedures with communities, written in a culturally friendly way. Communities need to know who to call, if there's an incident, if they've been a victim of a hate crime. Police should probably, most likely host regularly scheduled meetings to obtain feedback on, to give communities feedback on the response to hate crimes, the type of hate incidents that are in the community, and to provide, more importantly, adequate support to victims. And then finally, meetings provide opportunities for police to share data about the occurrence of hate crimes while simultaneously reinforcing the fact that police are seriously engaged in stopping hate crimes. And I think, you see that, throughout, when hearing the other presentations, what's going on in the business district, what's going on, with the Grand Bay Educational Association, meeting and talking with those kinds of groups, police going there, talking about training, talking about exactly what hate crime is, what to do, and that type of thing is important. Putting signs throughout New York, I see these signs that says, hate is not tolerated here. Hate is not, all are welcome here. And I see this in English, I see it in Spanish and French and Chinese dialects, every kind of dialect. And I see it on all these establishments. And I think it just sends a message, to people that, that there is an effort to stamp out this kind of, this kind of offending, and that people are more welcoming. I think the way to reduce hate crimes like the Mr. Moet that Agent Guillen was describing, which I thought was a fascinating story. I looked at some aggravating factors, but rarely do I get to hear, the richness of a story like that. But when you begin to make those people feel as though they are alone, and let's face it, they become a lot more emboldened for some reason or another. Some speculate as to why over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen them come out. You saw Mr. Mazurek talk about, people's opposition to, to including things like diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, paralleled with opposition to, to talking about critical race theory. So it's only through people such as business owners, like Mr. Hughes and others, and having these kinds of forums, that you can really kind of get the word out, that you begin to start seeing these kind of offenders, go back into their holes and disappear, that they hopefully will do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pizzella. That is really going to guide and inform the work that we continue to do. And I heard you say that you see signs in New York in different languages that have messaging such as hate does not belong here. That is exactly the type of messaging we hope to convey throughout this campaign that we are initiating. So thank you again for your response. Our next question is for SSA Guillen. Are you still with us, SSA Guillen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so during your presentation, you noted that Monroe County and local park rangers were quickly on the scene and that the Monroe County prosecutor initiated charges. What triggered the FBI's involvement in this case? And also, in your experience, is there any potential for disconnect between local law enforcement agencies and federal agencies in classifying and prosecuting crimes as hate crimes?
So I'm going to go ahead and answer the second part of your question first, and then come back to the first half. There absolutely is a disconnect. I think there's a misunderstanding with many state prosecutors and many local detectives as to what constitutes a federal hate crime and what sort of triggers that ability to charge. I think in a lot of states, and definitely some of the ones that I previously worked in, the idea of a hate crime, it doesn't really exist in their legal structures, right? They have sentencing enhancements often, which can be used in instances of hate, but the federal system has a completely separate crime, right, under Shepard Burger. And so for us, what we often see the disconnect being is local prosecutors and local detectives aren't looking for potential federal prosecution. They don't know exactly what the structure is, and they don't think about asking those questions. And this is a wonderful example of that. My office has a fantastic relationship with Monroe County, both the prosecutor's office and the county sheriff's office. But they didn't bring this case to us. They didn't even think of it. And they didn't think of it because they sort of weren't trained to think of it in that manner. In this case, we came upon it because of a news article. One of my folks, actually, if I remember correctly, it was Special Agent Nickel, who was the primary investigator here. If I remember correctly, he saw it on the news, and recognize the potential for federal prosecution, recognize that we did have that sort of tricky third tier that because of racial animus, and we reached out to Monroe County to discuss with them the potential of federal prosecution. And Monroe County was from the beginning very much on board with that. In fact, when we talked to the prosecutor first off, he was very interested in having us look at it and pursue it, and even to the point of agreeing to drop local charges to make the federal prosecution easier. So I think there's a lot of cooperation there. I think there's a lot of potential there. But I think that there is a disconnect when we don't necessarily see these, right? We don't get, my office doesn't get like every prosecution that Monroe County does. We don't get all the reports, or we don't review everything automatically. And, had that news article been reported differently, had the news article not made the racial animus clear enough for us to pick up on it, we wouldn't have thought it was anything but a simple assault.
Thank you, Mr. Viahan. And that actually brings me back to something that Dr. Pizzella shared as a part of his recommendations in terms of the reporting issue. Dr. Pizzella, do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Regarding reporting, or regarding the interaction between state and federal prosecutors?
Interaction between state and federal prosecutors.
Yeah. So we certainly need to see more of that. I mean, one of the questions I put in the chat just now for Agent Guillen was, was about the Ahmaud Arbery case. We know that those offenders were convicted. They wasn't convicted of a hate crime, but they were convicted of a life sentence. But yet the U.S. attorney brought hate crime charges. And I'm just curious to know, why do you, obviously they were getting a most severe sanction. I mean, they wasn't getting the most severe sanction because they wasn't put to death. But why do you think they brought that charge even after the, for all intended purposes, a life sentence, by the state of Georgia?
I will confess that I haven't looked at that case in great depth, but I will offer two strong possibilities there. The first is that we will often see duplicate charges to ensure that a defendant sort of stays convicted, if you will, right? So let's envision a situation where the state brings murder charges, homicide charges, and the federal government brings civil rights charges, hate crime charges, right? And let's say that there's something that happens down the road that eliminates that state homicide conviction. The killers do an appeal, witness recants, whatever, right? That charge, that conviction then maybe disappears. You've still got the federal charge hanging there, right? And of course, as you know, Dr. Pizzella, but some of the other folks may not, we deal with what we call dual sovereignty here. The state system is one system, the federal system is the other. And you can win in the state court and lose in federal court. So my guess here would be that that's the primary reason. We want to make sure that Mr. Arbery's killers don't go free, even if there was an error in the state conviction, even if there was a problem there, they're still convicted under federal law. And even if that appeal works, they'd have to do a completely separate federal appeal there.
Yeah, I thought it noteworthy that that they brought those hate crime charges, noting that Georgia didn't have a hate crime statute at the time. They now have that hate crime statute. But, my thought was that they were bringing the hate crime charge for the same reason that you talked about with the Moat case, to send a signal, to society that this kind of offending, would not be tolerated. So just curious about that. And certainly the extent of the severity in the Moat case. As I said, I was just kind of fascinated by that case. He got 60 months, and that was in consideration of what he could have got in the state, which was time served, and probation, and he got practically the max. I guess they looked at bias as an aggravating factor under the federal sentencing guidelines, and that's how he got to the 60 months.
Yeah, and Mr. Mowat did also have a comparatively minor criminal history, which is, as you know, Dr. Pizzella, is one of the things that increases that sentencing range quite a bit. But yeah, the judge in this case was very, very very much recognized the absolute severity of this, the very clear pattern of bias, and honestly, just like the straight up language, the fact that Mr. Mowat started the confrontation, like it all factored in. It was one of the things that we sometimes run into with hate crime prosecutions is this idea that there can be mutual combat, or there could be a situation where two people have words, and now we're trying to prove that the one party went too far. The judge here really recognized this was a situation engineered by Mr. Mowat, created by Mr. Mowat, entirely his fault front to back, and I think sentenced appropriately with that in mind.
Yeah. So Tiara, to answer your question, I think that what often happens, at least here in New York State, and it sounds like in Michigan, there's a good possibility that a lot of these cases are pled down. So what originally starts as a hate crime is then pled down to its ordinary crime counterpart. Why? Because, as Agent Guillen pointed out, you look at the statute, when you start looking at because of, or with malicious intent, or willful, that is a higher level of what we call a mens rea requirement, a higher level of intent. It is more likely for a prosecutor to get a plea, to get a conviction for its ordinary crime counterpart than have to put in that kind of work and take the chance of losing the case because he's got to prove a biased motivation. And so that's probably one of the reasons why we're delighted to have the Matthew Shepard, James Berry Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act to make sure that people are prosecuted for exactly the kind of motivation that reflected the animus they had, toward a victim.
Yeah, thank you both, Dr. Pizzella and SSA Guillen. I'm sure that we could talk to the both of you all evening on this subject, but I do want to be able to pose the questions that we have for Mr. Hughes and Mr. Mazurek. Daisuke Hughes, a question for you. What advice would you give to other restaurants who are looking to become active and take a stand on issues in the community?
Yeah, this is Daisuke speaking. I really liked what Dr. Pizzella said regarding, regardless of where we stand in our respective backgrounds, if we are all collectively sending a message, I think that's what I seem to hear from him. Whether if it's at the school board level, or if it's at federal prosecuting levels, or whether it's in restaurants or cafes or people's doorsteps, sending a strong message, and maybe that hasn't been here over the decades enough, and we're starting to see that. And like he said, it kind of, once you start to begin to feel that your stance isn't the majority stance, maybe you will kind of start to become less emboldened. I'm not sure, but I really liked that he said that, because it kind of pulls everything that we're doing, all the work we're doing together. So, regarding what other people could do in the industry, I think, you see this on social media, but things become contagious. While we were doing those fundraisers, there was a lot of other people reaching out to us at that time, asking us how they could get involved, how they could contribute. You saw that very quickly. You saw it on the lens of other restaurants or food industry partners that wanted to step in, but you also saw it in the ability to raise awareness for other groups that we weren't aware of that might have needed some help. In terms of fundraising or raising awareness, a lot of it was, even for Baobab, the restaurant, the East African restaurant, I think more than anything, we raised a lot of awareness of this restaurant opening here in Detroit. And just as a little background, the two proprietors, who are dear friends of ours, they were refugees from Burundi that came through Freedom House Detroit. A whole nother story, an unbelievable story. and how far they've come from Burundi to restaurant owners on the corner of Grand Boulevard and Woodward. It's unbelievable. And as soon as he said it to me, as soon as he landed and made it, the first thing he thought was, it's now time for me to reach my hand out and help those that are coming through behind me.
That is amazing. Really, really quickly, Daisuke, where are your restaurants located for people who want to support?
Yeah, sure. Ochre Bakery is in Core City at the corner of Warren and Grand River. Open Wednesday through Sunday, 8 to 3. And then Astro Coffee's on Michigan Avenue and 14th in the shadow of the Michigan Central train station. And we are also Wednesday through Sunday, 8 to 3 and 9 to 4 on the weekends.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mazurek, question for you. What has been the response of the school district and the parents in the district to the proposed resolution? And also, what are your next steps in moving forward?
Thank you again, Blake Mazurek speaking. Initial response it was positive from our school board and our administration, and I did hear some positive responses from community members as well. We do see some challenges, and I say this not just as somebody from Granville Public Schools. I'm talking about in our nation. We are seeing, and this is where I'm going to be putting a call to action to folks attending here tonight, is it's so critically important that you attend or you engage in your local school districts, even if you do not have children living or you're not a parent in the districts, because we are seeing an active campaign happening across this country where there is a concerted effort to undermine efforts of local schools and teachers to be able to teach honest history. Like I mentioned earlier, I teach U.S. history, and many of these you are starting to see bills popping up, even in Michigan legislature, but across our country, that are looking to take the honesty out of teaching U.S. history. Not to mention where there's so much misinformation, disinformation surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion, and social emotional learning. We need to be engaged in this process. We need to be an active voice. Our school boards and administration and teachers are seeking that support from our communities. We cannot do this without you, and that's my call to action for everybody on this call.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mazurek. It is much appreciated. Unfortunately, that is our time for this evening. I would like to extend a major thanks once again to all of our panelists. Your expertise, action, and insight has provided for a very rich discussion today. I would also like to thank all of our registered participants and those who have viewed via live stream. We would like to welcome all of you back for our next campaign forum, which is scheduled for Thursday, March 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. We will have a special guest, Reverend Wheeler Parker Jr., the cousin and eyewitness to the kidnapping of Emmett Till, whose death helped spark the civil rights movement, and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, to the forefront of the civil rights movement. Also, don't forget to stay tuned for ways that you can get involved. Wishing you all a safe and restful evening. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.